You see, something's going to happen.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
What?
I understand how you feel. You see, it's all very clear to me now.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. In this episode, I got myself, I got Lisa, the Occult Reject mad scientist, and I got the Headless Giant himself. Lisa, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it. How are you doing tonight?
Absolutely. Doing very well. I am very much looking forward to this topic as we were talking about it before we hit the record button. Mm-hmm. Very intrigued. Very, very intrigued.
Yes. And then we got the man himself, the myth, the legend, Headless Giant. What is up, my man? My favorite Hellenic shit poster, or skits poster, whatever that says on the bottom. How are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing well. Looking forward to hearing about sleep paralysis and all the ins and outs, how these things happen.
Yes. Thank you. And thank you very much for making it. And you want to plug your show and let everybody know about like your other stuff going on.
Well, normally I do a mailbag on Wednesdays or Thursdays where I read your emails about experiences like the one Vicky is going to explain to us today. If it's a magical, paranormal, if it's a mystical experience you've had, send your story over to headlessgiantpodcast@gmail.com and I will read it on the air and break it down, usually with Nick.
Yes. Oh, you're not streaming out right now?
I don't think it popped up. So
oh,
that's all right.
My bad. I'm so sorry. So you want me to set it up so you can stream out real quick?
No, it's good.
All right, I feel bad. I just realized that. I thought you were going to stream out on your end. All right, I'm so sorry. Sorry. I screwed it all up. All right, well, thank you very much, Headless. And finally to the guest. Got my shit together now. Vicky Joy. She's made her rounds. You might have heard of her already, but she's finally made it onto the Occult Rejects, and very excited to have you on and to hear your story. Vicky, please let everybody know like what your deal is, where they can find your stuff, and you want to promote anything?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. Vicky Joy Anderson. You can find me at vickyjoyanderson.com. I've got a YouTube channel at Vicky Joy Anderson. You can find me on Instagram and most of the socials at Vicky Joy Author. And if you want to meet me in person, I will be in Mansfield, Ohio, the weekend of March 27 through 29, speaking on conjugal nightmares, the nuptials of Nosferatu at the Strange Land Conference. Information on my website.
Oh, wow. I'll have to tell JJ about that. I wonder how close that is to him. Yeah. When is that again?
March 27 through 29 in Mansfield, Ohio. And you can go to my website, vickyjoyanderson.com on the events tab, or you can go directly to throughtheblack.com.
Oh, okay. All right. I might have to look into that myself. I don't know. Mm-hmm. All right. So sleep paralysis. I don't know. I guess wherever you want to start with this, it's on you.
Ooh, where do we begin? Oh my goodness. I always like to tell people, I don't know who came up with this phrase, sleep paralysis. It's the dumbest phrase. Sleep paralysis has nothing to do with sleep. Really has very little to do with paralysis. There is a sleep paralysis. You know, we obviously go into paralysis at various sleep stages. It's a protective measure. It's part of our physiology. Keeps us protected. It keeps us from sleepwalking and wetting the bed and punching people and things like that. So there's nothing spooky or paranormal about having paralytic states during your sleep. And that really is almost unintentionally, I hope it was unintentional, it's almost a form of gaslighting because everyone experiences it, but not everybody experiences the spooky kind. So for the people who experience the more traumatic kind, we tend to get poo-pooed and gaslit by the people that have the physiological regular kind. And I really wish we could just come up with a different phrase, but it is what it is at this point. So I suppose we should start out with maybe a definition. And obviously you can go online. There's all sorts of official narrative definitions, but most of them are put out by science and medicine and people who have really no respect or interest whatsoever in anything supernatural or paranormal or mystical. Everything has to be plotted, on a graph or a chart or an Excel chart. And if anything is the slightest bit strange or weird or unexplained, it just gets written off and that person's schizophrenic or mentally ill or something like that. So if the only explanation you have of sleep paralysis is something you pulled off the internet or Wikipedia or NIH or something like that, you don't have any idea what it is or how horrific it is to the people who experience it. And so how would I explain sleep paralysis? Oh gosh, I really think that I have a different take on it than a lot of people. Your standard religious explanation is, oh, you opened up a door, you bad person, you did something wrong, and now demons are after you, and you deserved it because you're a bad person who played with a Ouija board or looked at porn. That's pretty much all you're going to get out of that. And say you're sorry, and Jesus will forgive you, and it'll never happen again. And which is really actually sad, because for a lot of people, it does happen again. And so you really do have to kind of understand what's going on here. I personally think that sleep paralysis is the tail end of a far more spectacular astral experience that has happened in the midst of an REM cycle. You're being abducted out of your body in an REM cycle. This is why there doesn't seem to be the timelines seem to not add up. And people who have done ayahuasca trips will talk about this as well. They've been out 10 minutes, but they had a 2-week or a 10-year experience. They've got the timeline doesn't match up.
I will say, I just want to add real quick, Vicky, I've even said this myself
Please
before, having magical experiences, the amount of time that you're gone for how long it felt like you were gone for, does not match. Does not match. It's like literally seconds, and it felt like you were doing it for like 10 minutes.
Absolutely. And this is why the official narrative breaks down, because the average REM cycle, the average dream cycle is 10 to 20 minutes. And when you come back from one of these astral abductions, as I will call them, you have hours worth of information that you remember. You're geo-hopping all over the place. I was in Italy. I was on an airplane. I was in an airport waiting for 3 hours. Now I'm in a car. Now I'm here. And there's no way all of that was compacted into a 10 or 20 minute REM cycle. You are out of the REM cycle at that point. The REM cycle is the jump space. Okay. That's where you go to pick up the bus. That's where you go to pick up the train, but you're leaving. And, I don't want to go off on a bunch of tangents here, so I'll just stick to finishing the definition. I believe that when we come back from these abductions, very similar to people who will talk about, say, a UFO abduction or an alien abduction, they have missing time and they don't remember what happened. They just know something happened.
Do you ever wonder if those are misunderstanding maybe something else?
Well,
from the experiences you have you ever wondered maybe those people who thought they were abducted might have actually been experiencing something else, and they kind of...
Absolutely.
I don't want to say concocted, but their brain concocted a way to deal with what was going on.
This is where it gets really tricky with all of these experiences, with the sleep paralysis and with ayahuasca and with the UFO abductions. If all we do is relegate everyone to schizophrenia or mental illness, crazy, they're looking for attention, we sort of have to have a little bit of a Me Too movement in the paranormal world, where there are people out there that are seeking attention. There are people out there who legitimately do have a traumatic brain injury or a genetic mental illness, etc. There's always going to be those outliers. But the fact is, we have thousands and thousands of people, and we have a historical record that goes back hundreds of years. We see reports of this in medical journals going all the way back to 16th century. We see it in Europe. Every culture has their own name for this. Not everybody calls it sleep paralysis. Some people call it the old hag. Part of my book, there's like 3 or 4 pages in my book where I go through like around the world in 80 days, so to speak. And every culture has their own explanation for what this dream character is or what this entity is. Like, is it a demon? Is it a screech owl? Is it a Lilith? Is it, everyone's got their own explanation. So to write off a historical record that rich in detail, we have to at some point have an intellectually honest discussion that is half the globe crazy, Or is there something going on and we just don't understand, you know? And one of the things that I think is really fascinating, I like to throw this sometimes into the face of people that want to get, you know, there's the people that want to use science to prove you wrong. There's people that want to use a medical textbook to prove you wrong. And then there's people that want to use religion to prove you wrong. And what I always tell to the people who are coming at me, I get a lot of criticism, unfortunately, from the Christians. You know, you're toting around one of the most supernatural books in the world, and you think this is weird? You think this is weird? I mean, this is like pretty tame stuff.
You're supposed to be drinking blood and eating flesh right now, but you think this is weird?
Right.
Fuck out of here.
So I always say, according to the very foundational texts of the scriptures in the Torah, the legal system of the ancients was if you had 2 or 3 witnesses, you legally had proof. That was evidence. You know, this was back before video cameras and all that stuff. If you had 2 or 3 witnesses that had the same testimony and they weren't contradicting and you could tell they weren't lying, if 2 or 3 people were saying the same thing, it was codified into legally that was the truth. And so if you've got not 2 or 3 people saying this stuff is happening to me, but you have thousands, even in the 2.5 years since my book came out, I could give you 1,000 witnesses because I get the emails and the DMs. And so we have to, even from a philosophical and a religious perspective, based on the evidence of witnesses. We have too many people who don't know each other from different centuries and different cultures, all saying the same thing. And we all know some of this stuff. We all know.
Vicky, I had a question there. Do you think any of this could be psychologically produced? Like these could actually be like driven by perception? Like a lot of people hear about the phenomena and then they actually end up experiencing it themselves.
Yes, absolutely. That's a really good point. And I don't know if anyone's ever brought that up before, but it's interesting because even the way I set up my book, I have at the end of every chapter, I have like this, I call them warfare points. They're things that you should consider before you even go on to the next chapter. And I tell people this book is not for entertainment. This isn't to tell campfire stories. This isn't for titillation. If you don't have this problem, you've never had sleep paralysis in your whole life, and you're reading books on it, and you're online, and you're on the message boards, and you're on Reddit, and you're watching all the movies, you can obviously open up a door where if you're filling your mind with all of that stuff, it's kind of like a Field of Dreams scenario. I call it, if you build it, they will come. This also kind of fits in with the new CE5 language. Are you guys familiar with the Close Encounter of the Fifth Kind? Yeah. If you go out asking for it, if you're showing an intrigue for this stuff, and you're thinking things like, man, I wish that could happen to me. Like, oh, I'm going to drive to Area 51. I hope I can see a UFO. There's a point where if you build it, they will come. Like, you know, and you can chalk that off to psychology. You can chalk it off to invitation. You know, you can go back into the vampire folklore. You invited it. You gave it permission. You thought it would be really cool if you had this experience. So you got what you asked for. So however you want to define that in your worldview, whether it's psychological and brain related, which I think it is, or if it's spiritual in some sort of sense, like you are quote unquote opening doors, if that's the language that you're familiar with, you can call it whatever you want. But the fact of the matter is, if you've never had this problem, you can have this problem real quick if your intrigue supersedes your interest in just trying to help another person or figure it out. Yeah.
Now, are you saying also in the book with you saying like, I guess warning about going farther, I'm assuming what you're getting at is maybe these experiences are a little bit more intense than people would like to believe. Because, I mean, I do even say that about magic. From my experiences, I remember, this is silly, but I don't know why it stuck in my head. But, I was a big Iron Maiden fan when I was younger. And they had this song called Still Mind or something like that on the album Peace of Mind. Something. And Nico McBrain, the drummer, was speaking backwards. And, eventually I played it backwards to see what he said. And this was after the fact I've actually had magical experiences. Some reason I remembered that song. I was like, oh, I have equipment now. I could play this backwards and see what he was saying. You know, like I have, podcasting shit. I could play it backwards.
Yeah.
So I played it backwards and it says you shouldn't mess with things that you don't understand. I was like, fucking exactly, man. I was like, I shouldn't have been messing with that shit that I didn't understand. And when I found out what it was, it smacked me in the face. It's joke.
Yeah.
No joke.
Well, and that's fascinating too, because I don't know. I only know what's written in the press, and God only knows what's true and what's not true. But it's interesting that a lot of these guys that messed with that kind of stuff, I think the drummer of Iron Maiden has recently come out saying he became a Christian. So you wonder what led him to, pendulum swinging that drastically over into the other. What did he unearth? And, and we all know, I love studying the lore of Led Zeppelin and Jimmy Page, and Crowley's house and the house burning down, and all of like the rituals he did on stage, like with the violin bow and pointing to the compass points, and like, I mean, the guy knew what he was doing. He plays it off like it's all just rock and roll, man, but he knows what he's doing.
Yep. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to point out on the conspiracy side of this. So there was a report that Eli Lilly manipulated the Japanese language because they didn't have a word for depression. And Eli Lilly wanted to sell their antidepressants in Japan and make billions of dollars. So they manipulated the language to introduce the cultural concept of depression from America over there, and created a $5 billion kind of industry for antidepressants in Japan, using celebrities too, by the way. So these celebrities would get what they called the sad flu. The sad flu, that's what the interpretation of depression is in Japanese. Could you imagine the manipulation of saying, somebody's sad in your life, it could wear off on you?
You got a version of the flu, that's why you're depressed.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
You could get the country into sort of having these kind of experiences.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The nocebo effect, I tell people, hypothetically, if they wanted to pull off everything that they pulled off in 2020 without an actual virus, they could have done it. It's called the nocebo effect.
Yeah.
If you tell everybody on the news every single night, there's something going around, you're going to die, these are the symptoms. If you have a en masse emotional reaction of fear and anxiety, and they're ruminating on those side effects and things, you will have a global pandemic, and you didn't spend a dime and there's no virus. Now, I'm not saying that that's what happened, but I'm saying that's the power of these nocebo effects, and the powers that be know these things. And with words, with language, absolutely there's magic in that. We've got, we've all heard the adages, spelling, cursive writing, vowels. We've got the L in there.
Grammar comes from grimoire.
Grammar, yes, that was it. I knew there was another one. Thank you. Yeah, so we know that they know what they're doing, and they're really good at it. And so with some of these sleep paralysis things and the UFO phenomenon and the paranormal activity, and so let me give you a few examples, because typically when I'm on these shows, we're talking about all the phenomenal stuff, and we're talking about the demonic stuff and the spiritual stuff. Let's talk about some of the smoke and mirrors stuff. They have technology now that can reproduce every aspect of the sleep paralysis experience. There are medications, there's muscle inhibitors, succinylcholine used by every EMT. And when you want to sedate a person, or like you have to sedate a person before you intubate them, because you don't want to just shove a tube down people's mouths. It's people don't like it. And so they have to give you a sedative before they give you succinylcholine. And because succinylcholine mimics so many of the uncomfortable aspects of sleep paralysis that it terrifies people. And so they sedate them, then they give them the succinylcholine, and then they intubate them. And there's an awesome article, I reference it in my book, and it's called Succinylcholine, the World's Most Discreet Murder Weapon. And if you OD somebody on succinylcholine, they will actually die of what will absolutely feel like a sleep paralysis experience. They can't move. It's a heavy like weight on their chest. They feel like they can't breathe. Their heart is pounding. They have this terror. It's crazy. And as far as the shadow people go, there's two different ways, technologically or through frequency, that you can mimic a shadow person. There are certain quadrants of the brain that if you probe it, a person will see a shadow person, as well as frequencies. And so I can't remember, like, there's a frequency threshold that our human ear can hear. But if you're under like 4 hertz, something like that, you'll see supernatural or paranormal phenomenon. And great articles online about, there was a man who kept seeing all of this paranormal activity in his lab at night, and other people would report it, and they were scared and they thought the place was haunted. Long story short, there was a desk fan in the office, and it oscillated at under 4 hertz. And it was creating these moods, and it had this, the frequency had the effect on the brain. And so you could easily, if you wanted to gaslight somebody, like, you got that spouse you want to knock off, like you could easily, if you had the knowledge of various medications, brains, frequencies, different things, you could mimic all of this stuff. And so I'll give you another example of paranormal activity that seemed really spooky at one point in time, but now we have an explanation for it. Several decades, when the phones first started coming out and people started telling all these spooky paranormal stories about how voicemails would show up on their phone that weren't there before, and they don't know who it was, and messages were showing up on their phone. And then you started hearing like really creepy photos were showing up in people's photo albums on their phone. And it would be pictures of like areas in their house with like a shadow creature or something. And it would be not a picture that they ever took, and that's creepy if you tell that story in a vacuum. But now we know enough about remote desktop viewing and what people can do, anybody in an IT department. We know that there are people in various sitting at various desks in government where they can access your phone, they can turn it on, they can plant files in your computer, they can take them out. You can Photoshop a spooky picture and stick it on someone's phone. There's nothing creepy about that. And so some of this stuff that we're experiencing, I do think we're being totally trolled because we're behind the technology that's available. And so it looks like they've got some sort of power or ability when it's really just people with the tech and the goodies and the toys that can do some of this stuff. So
yeah, that's something. Go ahead, Headless. So my bad.
Oh, but you got the whole Havana syndrome where somehow electro frequencies caused all these diplomats to fall ill. And so, just now they're starting to actually admit that this stuff exists, which is crazy. The CIA wouldn't pay out their own employees because they said that technology doesn't exist, and yet they're the ones who have been using it,
Oh man, yeah. We've been trolled since at least 1901. I mean, we've been trolled since the beginning of time, but with the technology, and even what did you guys? It's Tesla had his, like, what was it called? His ray gun, or what did they call it? It has like this super cheesy like cartoon name to it. But if you actually read on Tesla's laser gun or ray gun or whatever it was called, I can't bring it to my mind at this very moment.
Or something like that.
Was it a ray gun?
Yeah, there's a guy in our show made the same thing. I
Lasers.
think it was such a cheesy, silly name, and I was just like, "What? You made what?"
I know. But if you read on that, it was frequency technology. It was this whole disemboweling crowds and kind of stuff like that, And so, I mean, when you think about some of the stuff that they were privy to in 1901, you're talking about Tesla's like Wi-Fi tower out on the East Coast and stuff like that. They knew how to tap into this stuff a long time ago, and so I absolutely, without discrediting the reality that some people experience, there are people that have interfaced with beings, whether it's an alien abduction or it's some sort of we know people astral project and they go and they talk to ascended masters and spirit guides. Like we know that there's validity to these things, but as far as the general masses of people that don't look into these things and haven't experienced these things, when these sort of things happen to them, I think that there's a disconnect really in how much they are able to mimic through technology and frequency.
Absolutely, especially that time dilation aspect.
Yes.
If you're hitting somebody with these frequencies and you're dilating their time perspective, it changes the entire nature of the witness testimony, because everything could be happening differently, but because you're being hit with that time dilation, it makes everything sound, completely bizarre.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
A while ago, we had a guest on Leon Southgate. And now he's just somebody who plays around with Orgone. Like you were mentioning before, kind of like, and I kind of want to go somewhere with this, like either trolling, like you were saying before, I do think that's possible. People or the government playing with things and we're getting side effects. But like, and where I'm going with that is like, we had a guy, Leon, on our show who plays with Orgone. And he charges it enough to where it's like if he puts on the spin cycle on his, washing machine, he starts getting like weird stuff going on in his house. But like it's even gotten to the point to where, and I don't. First, if you met the guy, honestly, I don't think he's lying. Go back and listen to the show if you haven't. Not you, but just people listening. I honestly don't think this guy's making this up, and he has actually published papers on Orgone. So it's like he's not stupid. He's not making this crap up. But he said one time he had it charged so much that like painters showed up at his like kind of at his loft, or flat, or wherever he lives in this apartment place. And you know how like sometimes vans will have like pipes on the side of them? They have like that thing that they lock into. They have pipes, or they'll have like things in glass or whatever. They had pipes in there, but they were standing up. He literally said from the Orgone being charged so much. Now at this point, what I'm getting at too, at this point, tell me this ain't going into your fucking neighbors. I ain't believing it. This shit got all the way out into the street, went up into those tubes, and since there were copper tubes, started changing the sky because it's a cloud buster at this point. And that's what he does. He cloud busts. He makes all those guns and stuff. You tell me that stuff, somebody saw that shit. What the fuck you think you're looking at? It's some dude inside his house playing with Orgone. Yeah. You could be next door and you're like hearing shit. He says if he sits next to it and charges it enough, he thinks a question, he gets an answer. He hasn't really gone into it too much because I think he is mind blown by it. But what if that's happening to you next door? You have no idea. Absolutely. It's this fucking dude, harmless guy, fucking around with his toys.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And if the government's playing with that shit, how the fuck do we know what's going on with us?
Well, all that Orgone stuff is happening in the earth as we speak right now. So there's a lot of different areas that can produce these different types of effects that reproducing at his house, So a lot of this goes into the geography and the way that the energy moves around you.
Yeah. It's interesting because obviously I believe in paranormal activity. I believe that there is a spiritual realm. I believe that there's beings and entities that may or may not, can or cannot interact with us, and that people have interacted with them. So I'm not negating that. I talk to people every day who are interfacing with these things, but I'm loving the way that this conversation is going because we rarely get to talk about this, and that is that there is also a point where, if I was the general of an army and I only had 10 soldiers, if I could get some smoke and mirrors and some lighting and some photoshopping, and I could get the enemy to think I actually had 10,000 soldiers instead of 10, I would utilize that, right? And so I do think it's not that I don't think that these entities exist and that some of them are, not our friends and whatnot, but I think if you removed their infrastructure, which is all the stuff known and unknown to us, like what we're talking about now, the geology, the ley lines, the frequencies, the electromagnetic, the 5G, the tech, all of this stuff. If you took all of the infrastructure away, I think that the stuff that was really magical and spiritual would be exponentially smaller than we think it is. Because I think they've built an infrastructure that magnifies their power.
I've actually wondered that if we're actually you're trying to put us into a state where magical effects or magic is actually easy to conduct. And that some people may start experiencing it because of the situation.
this goes into exactly that point, because it's like these different frequencies, these different states that you're being sort of projected into would be the best place for these intelligences to hang out if they're out there. So obviously this is like the playground for all that stuff. And I think it could go back to resonant frequencies, like you were talking about, that very low hertz ratio usually picks up a resonance within a given room. So if you're adding this to the total amount of energy in there, you're talking about changing not only your perception of that reality based off of the resonant frequency of those spaces, but you're talking about actually changing the nature of the matter itself. So a lot of stuff could come through those specific states simply based off of the fact that it produces a much more harmonious kind of environment,
Absolutely. I would love to get your guys' take on this. When these two worlds collide, you've got technology, and you've got technology that's advanced beyond what the consumer knows is available. So it will appear magical to them, but it really is just tech. But then you do have an element of the paranormal now using that technology as a conduit. So the paranormal is also involved. And so one of the things, one of the cases I've been really interested in, and I haven't heard too many people talk about it, but are you guys familiar with the Dodleston case, kind of back in the 80s in Wales? So hopefully I'm going to piece these details together. This was back in the 80s when it was the beginning of the information age, and Margaret Thatcher really wanted to get computer literacy into all of the schools. And so they got a hold of a computer, for the classrooms, and they called it the BBC Micro. Okay, that was the name of the computer. And it was basically, you would hook it up to a CRT, and it was just basic functionality. And they had a word processing program. I can't remember what it was called. It was something very basic, like we call it Word. It was something like that. But you could pull up a basic word processing document, and then you could save a file, and you could save a file to your desktop or something like that. So this guy, I believe his name was Ken, and he was living with his girlfriend named Debbie, and then they had a third guy living with them named Nick. And so these three guys, gal and guys, they, the school that Ken, I think his name is, the school that he worked at, they had enough of these BBC Micros that teachers were actually allowed to bring some of them home, because they wanted to really encourage the teachers to interact with them and get to know how to use them and be more effective teachers, because computer literacy was like the driving force in the 80s. So they bring home one of these BBC Micros, they go to the pub for the night, and they come back, and there's a saved file on the desktop that nobody wrote. And they opened it up, and it was just a goofy, encoded, weird, nonsensical kind of a message. And they were just like, whatever, and deleted it, brought the micro back, and didn't think anything of it. So a few months passed by, and they end up borrowing the BBC Micro again, a second time, and it's the same machine. And same thing happens. They come back, and I will, this detail is integral. Both times when they came home and there was a file saved on their desktop that wasn't familiar to them, both times was a time where they neglected to shut the machine down before they left. So they left it on, they didn't power it down. And that's not so much of a big deal now, but back in the 80s, if you had a computer, you shut it down every time. And so when they didn't, these messages would. So long story short, they started communicating with the man who lived on their property in the 1500s. And it was a man from the past, and he called the BBC Micro like the box of lights, but in weird, like old Anglo-Saxon English, right? And what he claimed was that someone named 2109 came from the future and dropped this box off in his 1500s farmhouse. And how he got that thing to work, where he plugged it in, God only knows, I don't know. But so they were all communicating with 2109 from the future. And I can't remember what the guy's name was. It was L somebody from the past, from the 1500s. And that can all easily be chalked off now to remote desktop, somebody messing with them easily. We could do that if we had the technology. We could hack into our friend's computer and screw with them. It'd be great. It'd be so much fun. But what's interesting about the Dodleston case is, and this kind of goes back to the if you build it, they will come. They established communication with this 2109. So they willingly permitted this. They entered into willing communication with whatever 2109 was, whatever this was. You could chalk it all off to tech manipulation, except for the fact that Debbie, the girlfriend, started experiencing extreme paranormal activity where things were moving around in the house. She was painting one of the rooms and she would come in and there would be footprints all over on the floor. They became so afraid of this house that they actually moved out. They still owned the house, but they moved out. They couldn't live in it anymore. And Debbie was developing this whole like past life that she had with one of these computer personalities, kind of like a repressed old life was coming out. And she was talking about like dates that they had been on. And there was other paranormal activity like hair pulling and whatever. So here we have a situation where there probably was a tech infrastructure. There probably was some human intervention and experimentation with early remote desktop and things like that. But the way that it was presented was to foist it upon humans who didn't know they were part of the experiment. And it also gave birth to a larger paranormal experience. And Ken ended up writing a book about it, and it ended up sort of having an influence into the collective consciousness of did something from the past, or did some sort of spirit speak to them through this box, or was it just the tech, or was it a little bit of both? And that's where I'm curious, is where do these two worlds collide? And when you take away the tech and the frequency and all the things that they know how to manipulate, at what point do we still keep our minds open that there are entities that can ride on the coattails of all of this experimentation and this toying and this tech and use it to their advantage as open doors of access to communicate with us? Because I think that they do want to communicate with us. And I think there's a lot of people out there that want to be communicated with. And so it's interesting to me how we're in this new era where instead of the more religious conduits and tools like the Ouija boards and the different things that we used to use for communication, it's now turning into technology. And you can go all the way into the chat GPTs and the sentient, AI and all this stuff. That this is the direction that we're going. And I do think that the divination of the future is going to be far more technical than it is magical.
Well, we do see a lot of that going on within the ghost hunting communities. They're turning more to these radio frequencies that pick up words based off of how.
True.
I was going to bring that up. Yeah, spirit box, stuff like that.
Good point. Yes. Those things are freaky, man.
Yeah, it's not much different.
These computers and these cell phones, I mean, that's all they're dealing with is frequencies. So, I mean, how much of that is open circuitry being translated in there? How much of that is the remote desktop idea? I know if you're talking about Thatcher's time period, I don't think there was any internet back then. So
not that we knew, not that the deplorables knew about. No.
Right. So
Vicky, your case reminds me of everything from Charles Babbage, who invented the first analytical differential system back in 1822, when it was claimed that he divinated a being, potentially the devil, and attempted to make contact, and that he gave him, I guess, kind of like a blueprint of how to tap in to an electrical side or some sort of create a conduit to tap into another realm or whatever to kind of make this communication. And so when you hear the story of Charles Babbage, and then with that case, it reminds me of I forget his name. I always mispronounce it. Geordie
Rose. Oh, okay.
Yeah, thank you for the D-wave computing.
Yes.
He claims that eventually it will allow them to speak to the old ones, the Lovecraftian old ones. And so have this type of energy type frequencies that you're tapping into for the sake of communication, it begs the whole bringing up the Robert Monroe of tapping into different frequencies and all the patents that exist for frequency technology, looking at waves, looking at theta waves, looking at all kinds of brain manipulation with these frequencies that you could potentially not only tap into a creative realm or maybe like a paranormal realm, but also a realm to where you can dip in and out of, however you want to manipulate the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think this is the way that they're introducing it to us, how much control we really have. But when you talk about noetic sovereignty, this is the big AI kind of conversation now. How much control over my cerebral intellectual property am I going to control? Is this going to be a total recall thing where I go in and I get to choose where I shift in my realities, or do you have a whole bunch of pre-programmed stuff and you're just shoving in the trip to the Bermuda, Bahamas, and you're shoving in the, you just got married to a celebrity? Like, how much noetic sovereignty are we going to have? Now, what's interesting, I just did a podcast. I don't even think it's released yet because we just recorded it with the Christian Theological Dark Web, I believe it's called, with Ricky Lee and Shelley Ailman. And we talked the whole time about the Halo, which is this new device that's in a prototype model now. And it's two young guys. I think Eric Wohlberg is one of the creators of this. He's working with some people that used to work for Musk's neural lace technology. And it's this headband that you wear at night, and it does not induce or create lucid dreams, but through pulses, it picks up when you get into REM, and it picks up when you are having a moment of lucidity, and it will extend that time of lucidity for you. And of course, it's all based upon the shoulders of Robert Monroe's work and the hemisync technology, the brain entrainment, and all these binaural beats and all that stuff. But it's interesting how we are now getting into these realms, and the name of the prototype, because they're calling it the Halo now, and the name of the company is Prophetic. So Prophetic AI, and they've got all of these little hat tips in the name. It's a Halo by Prophetic, and the interface that you work with that hooks to the headband is called the totem. So we've got Inception kind of ideas now too as well. But what's interesting is the prototype for this Halo was called the Morpheus one, and so some people will think of the Matrix, but other people will think obviously of Morpheus, the god of sleep and dreams. But what's really interesting is if you go beyond that, if the actual Morpheus, which we get from Ovid's book, right? The Greek word that's based on is morphe, and morphe does not mean sleep or dream or conscious or rest or anything of the like. Morphe means fashioner, and it means to form or to shape. And so if you're going to talk about my noetic sovereignty, but you're going to call this device Morpheus, which is some sort of a god that can form and shape my conscience, who does have the sovereignty in this situation? And I think that's kind of one of the ethical debates that's going on now in the tech realm when it comes to lucid dreaming or reality shifting, as the youngins call it now. But, how do I know, even when I'm lucid and I'm allegedly calling the shots? How are you going to assure me with all of this technology and potential dream characters that they sort of nebulously call it? How do I know that when all of these frequencies are pulsing in my head at night and I'm running into dream characters that I'm now communicating with, coming into agreement with, giving invitation to, how at the end of the day do I really know I'm still maintaining my noetic sovereignty when I'm potentially in a world that I am not a citizen of? How do I get all of my ethical rights as a human being on someone else's turf? And these are some questions that they're going to really have to answer. And I don't think that they're prepared to answer them quite yet. They're just running excitedly barreling down the train track because they have the technology, because they can do it. But I think some of the foundational questions haven't been answered yet.
Didn't some of the people that participated in the prototype claim that the Halo, the prototype, that it created false prophets for them and that it was prophetic and that it was predicting things?
Yes. Yep.
Vaguely remember, because I remember when that came about, because it was right about the time when I believe there were certain industries that were paying for patents to be able to download what is it called, commercials into your brain during sleep.
Oh no.
Remember that? I don't know if you remember that, but they were
Holy shit.
Kill me now. Kill me now.
And it was during this whole
Come
Halo
on.
prototype thing.
I'm fucking having dreams of like Gillette
McDonald's
razors.
was one of them.
You're in that dream, and like you're right at the part where we interrupt this.
Yeah, we interrupt this dream.
The McRib is back.
Yeah.
Yep.
That way it's all right.
The garbage strata of media invading your dreams. What a nightmare.
Dude, who?
Right?
Who? What? Oh
You know,
my goodness,
something-
it's crazy.
When you were saying before about, I guess you're kind of saying like, is your ideas really your own? There's this channel, I can't remember the name now. I do want to try to get him on. I honestly think, unfortunately, the show's too occult for the guy. But he really has some real good work on like he'd be putting out microphones out in different areas, in caves, outside, the woods, all over. And just lets it record. And then he throws it in this thing and goes and picks up this stuff. There is legit specific stuff being said in the airways that you can pick up and hear.
Wow.
And it's just like, when it comes to this, like, people who are schizophrenic, are they really hearing something actually? That's actually really there. How
Or
do you
is it
know
the
the
cover
pills that
story?
they're taking doesn't make them more susceptible to the shit that's out there?
I'm going with the
They
cover
do.
story.
They do. And it's like, is it the cover story for the people? Like, I always love to quote this because, man, as a writer, there's always those things that you read and you're like, oh, why didn't I write that? It was so beautiful.
There was
It
stuff
like
this guy pulled out
perfect
that
sense.
was specific too. You clearly
Yeah.
heard it saying specific things. It wasn't even like,
Yeah.
trying to figure out, you know?
The I love the opening paragraph of Call of Cthulhu. And Lisa, you had mentioned Lovecraft earlier. Basically, that sentence or two in a nutshell is humans are on this island, this placid island of ignorance. And the reason that they're ignorant is because all of the sciences, which used to be one collective quantum entangled puzzle, all put together, has been blasted, and the puzzle pieces have all strained so far away in so many directions that no one understands anymore that all of the pieces used to connect. Science does have to do with math, and math does have to do with reading, and it does have to do with language and spelling and history. This stuff is, and what we have now is we're living in a world where we have brains in our head that are pattern recognition systems. That's the way our brains work. We recognize patterns. And we're now in a place where when people start to recognize patterns, they're connecting dots that supposedly don't connect. So what happens? We're called crazy. You're connecting all these dots that has nothing to do with each other, but that's our brain is designed to recognize patterns. And it's hard for us to recognize patterns because in America, we're on a linear, we do things chronologically. We read and we write and we report news. We gather our information on a linear scale. But if you go to Hebraic thought, if you go to Asian thought, we've got circular logic over here. We've got compartmentalized or block logic in the Semitics. And so if we compartmentalized our information in blocks or categories or pigeonholes instead of linear, we would connect far more dots. Because instead of...
That's the Greek language.
Yeah, exactly. It is.
Encoded in these different, like
It is.
these different pigeonholes, and it made sense of the universe by making these associations.
Exactly. And we lose the ability to make those associations when we only live 80 years and we don't know what happened 100 years ago. We don't, let's put every plague that ever happened together in one category. Now we can see all the commonalities, but we can't because we only remember one of them because it was only our lifetime and maybe grandpa told us about another one. So all this to say,
Sorry, really quick. That reminds me of the movie Arrival. Whenever use the circular language and how it completely reshaped her brain and allowed her to be able to see more connections and more things than she could when she just on a linear timeline or a linear language. And
Yes.
exactly what I'm saying is that they have kind of not dumbed us down, but made it so simplistic in the way that we look at things that by removing this circular form of or block form of language, they have almost shut down that part of the brain to be able to make the connections. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no,
I wanted to say that.
perfectly said that. You've perfectly said that. And what's really interesting is Lovecraft goes on to say that one day when we piece all this information back together, you're going to have two options. This was the first original way of saying red pill, blue pill, right? Your two options are you're either going to take the blue pill and just kind of comatosely zombie state enter into the new dark age and you're going to like it whether you like it or not. Or does anyone remember the second option if you don't want to go with the new dark age? Anyone? You go mad. You get a schizophrenia label. And that's where we're at. If you have the ability to piece disassociated knowledge together that isn't disassociated, but it's ahead of the agenda, you will get a mental illness label.
That's even where I even go with when I've had magical experiences. I said I could see how people might think that they're schizophrenic or they could be deemed schizophrenic if maybe they got stuck in one for too long and started telling people the wrong people about it. But like, because it is almost like, just from my experience, it's like, I think you were saying it before, and I've said it in so many ways myself. I feel like you kind of get rewired and things start making sense that never made sense in your head before. You will like even see images of things somehow like, it's almost like if somebody's putting cards down or like and you understood how all of them connected or something. It's hard to explain, but it's really weird. And like, you have ideas that are almost so loud that it's as if somebody's talking to you, but you're not really hearing a voice, but it's like a shouting, like knowing in your head. And it's really weird. And I could see that getting confused maybe sometimes, you know?
Absolutely. Here's the irony too. So let's look at this. Let's take the diamond and turn it and look at a different facet for a moment. Let's look at this now through an eschatological lens. So eschatology, the study of the end of all things, or the reset, you know, in biblical terms, this would be revelation, you know, prophetic end times kind of stuff. Daniel, who lived in the Babylonian Empire during the time of one of the dispersions when they were brought to Babylon, he had all these prophetic visions, right? And he wrote them down, and we're still waiting for them to happen because they were predictions of the end times. And a lot of what got downloaded into Daniel's brain in those visions were confirmed because John, the Revelator, saw the same things. So here's the deal. Here's what's really fascinating. Here's where I'm going with this. We aren't allowed to understand arcane knowledge, right? We're not allowed to have that information. We're not allowed to connect dots. We're not allowed to collect allegedly dissociated knowledge and put the pieces back together. And if we try to, we will be shadow banned, will be labeled crazy, will be shut down, our YouTube channel will get deleted, we'll get sick, we'll be suicided, whatever happens, right? But here's the deal.
Cancer.
The fourth beast that rises from the sea, who will maintain global power and control. Interestingly, do you know what he is known for and why the people revere him?
I don't.
He understands dark sayings. So he's allowed to put all the disassociated knowledge back together into a big puzzle and look like the genius. And so we're stealing his thunder if we start figuring it out, because stupid human beings can't know the knowledge that this great fourth beast that rises has to know. But what's interesting is Lovecraft says that when disassociated knowledge comes back together, you're either going to accept it and like it, or you're going to go crazy.
Yeah, that's what I get at with the magical experience. I've even said this once on Twitter, that sometimes you may get answers to questions you didn't fucking ask or even want to ask. And that shit can fuck with your head.
It can, similar to heavy is the head that wears the crown, right? And this is a good example. I'm glad you said that, actually, Nick, because Daniel, who had all of these visions of the end, that he did not ask for either, he was physically ill for weeks after getting these visions. He was physically ill. And this is the thing, this is where I find it interesting. When you are traveling in church circles, there's always those people that will announce to you, I am a prophet. I have the gift of prophecy. If you go to church, you know at least 10 people who believe they have a gift of prophecy, right? But what they fail to do, and any one of us, if you've had a lot of sleep paralysis, or you've been pulled out of your body, or you've been in the astral realm, you will notice that once that has happened, you're pretty chronically fatigued for the next couple days. You're tired, you're drained, you're confused, you're kind of looking over your shoulder, like you're in a very frenetic emotional state. And when people come up to me and say, I have a gift of prophecy, and I had this dream, and then he said this, and he said that, and he said this, and this is going to be great. Like, you're too cavalier, you're too cheery, and you got way too much energy.
That's right. I've said that.
Because
I said, it ain't that Kermit the Frog thing dancing around. You ever see, like, when people have that start dancing Kermit, that they had a spirit, a spiritual awakening? I'm like, yo, you wouldn't be not that fucking happy at first.
You would not. You'd be more freaked out. You'd be a little more humbled. You'd be introspective. And even the movies give this away. When here's a good example. In Stranger Things, every time Elle is put in the water and she has the halo put on and she, remote views, she comes back drained and upset. She's got a nosebleed. She doesn't want to do this. Every time she's told she has to go in the tank, it's psychologically traumatizing for her. So anybody that says that, I interface with all these beings and love and light and everything's great, and they're doing jumping jacks and stuff, I'm like, I don't know who you were interfacing with, because the examples that we have in, especially in the scriptures, but other places as well, when you're really interfacing with these beings, there is a emotional, mental, psychological drain. And if you're interfacing with them often over a period of time, or your whole life, or I talk to people, and I myself as well, I had sleep paralysis for over 40 years. I still have it every now and then. But when that happens to you, it has a mental, physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual effect on you, and the way you think and the way you speak and these are the kind of signs I look for when I'm looking for authenticity in someone's experiences.
Yeah, no, I was even, there was something earlier before, I think you're talking about experiences and how people would if you get enough witnesses, it almost be kind of like becomes real, I guess, justified.
Yeah.
And back in the day, I mean, I'll use this one as an example because we covered her. But like Hildegard, Saint Hildegard, she had these visions, and eventually the Vatican took it into consideration and sent somebody all the way to go see her to actually hear what these things were. And obviously must have been something that checked off enough check boxes. The Vatican to say this lady had an experience. I do think there is certain things that happen when you have these experiences. Mm-hmm. Shared experiences. I think it is something, eventually if you have this experience, it's like tapping into consciousness, and at that point everybody has that same experience to an extent.
Yeah.
And speaking to your point of Hildegard is regarded as a polymath. And if you look at these polymaths, exactly what you said, Vicky, this is the moment in time when an actual human being is piecing all of the disciplines together: mathematics, physics, mysticism, science, music, botany, whatever it is, they're all together within their brain and making these analogy correlations and then outputting something like Hildegard did and having these mystical experiences. And like Nick, you were saying, she was always exhausted. She was always, she was starving. She was not sleeping. She wasn't eating. She was,
Lisa,
out completely.
Have you heard the telepathy tapes yet?
Mm-mm.
You need to listen to that because that is
too.
right up that alley. Yeah, because the telepathy tapes is talking about these kids with autism that have it. I guess it would be a sensory disorder, so much so that they can't talk, right? And so they assumed that these kids were incapable of communication. But what they found is that they can type. And so these kids have actually been typing really amazing things that show that what they have is purely on the outside. There's something very profound going on the inside. And what that has shown is that these kids actually have the ability to read their parents' minds and able to respond before actual stimulus and all the rest of this stuff as well.
Yes. I've never heard the tapes, but you're absolutely right in that what we perceived autism as being slow is actually autism. Autism is actually fast in that they are perceiving everything at such
I've thought that myself too.
That the
Information overload.
Right, is an actual symptom of the fact of the overstimulation. It's almost not akin to it, but it's kind of like you take a human voice and you run it through like whatever however mathematical calculation. If you were to speed up the sound of a whale, it would sound like a human being speaking. If you were to slow down the sound of a macaw, of a chimpanzee, it would actually sound like a human being speaking. And it's all based on frequencies that if you just slow them down or speed them up, and the same thing with autism is that they're perceiving things at such a high, fast rate. It's not that they're slow, it's the opposite of it.
The most common identifiable symptom that all of these kids have is synesthesia.
Oh, wow.
They have the actual working between perceptions of certain things that overlap with each other. Correct. Yes, that is what they have. And it's almost like usually every single autistic child or person has something that they are a genius in, which genius itself does not happen often in the normal human mind. Normal being, I don't have another word for it. But when you look at an autistic functioning brain, you do have genius happening much more often in whatever field that they do become a genius in. So, yeah.
There's something about that sensory area, though. Once you've sort of started messing with that sensory area, it throws off the outside world while turning on something on the inside. I mean, you see that happening with blind people who can, listen their way around a room just by making clicks. These things happen in the sensory area more so than anywhere else. And that goes back to what you were saying, Nick, about the eyes being this powerful shaper of the soul.
Something I do want to add to this, and I know I've said it on the show a few times. I've joked about it in certain ways, but I remember the time when I've explained like one time I kind of like pushed it. I fucked around with magic like 3 times within like very close to each other. I did it 3 times kind of back to back, and I was pretty twisted to an extent, like mentally I guess, and it was to the point to where I couldn't have a text conversation. It was impossible because if you were looked at it after I pushed send, you'd realize like there was so much thought that I thought I typed and just couldn't do it fast enough, and it just made no sense. But in my head, I knew what I was saying, and like even really trying to talk to anybody like physically, I had to like really kind of like control myself to make it sound normal because it like literally felt like I was just stuck at a different speed. And it just wasn't making sense, and I was like, "Yo, is this what like fucking autistic people is like?" I was like, because it's just like I would make no sense to somebody, and if I started telling them the ideas that I had in my head, they'd be like, "Yo, dude, you're crazy. Like you're stuck on like some math fucking thing right now," or like, you're going through like all these weird associations, just like weird shit that, someone autistic would be able to pull out of their ass out of nowhere and just run with. You will find yourself like that, possibly with like Kabbalah, if you have a magical experience. Oh, that you just, it's like shit will just fucking like diarrhea of thoughts. And you can't like spit it out at the same speed. And it's very annoying and uncomfortable. Yeah, but I remember that like literally I had to like even not try to talk to people for like a day or two through text because I was just like I can't even make sense.
It's the idea of download, right? So like a download of information is creates that massive.
Yeah, it's even like your thoughts are like the speed of a download at that point too, and it's like after the fact. Yeah, it's very weird. It's very weird.
Vicky, I had a question. You were talking about going back a little bit back to sleep paralysis, that it only happens in REM, and that would be the jumping off point, or that would be the point of that. I guess it is most easily able to, astrally have that experience, right? A couple of questions. Is it linked to? I know it's linked to REM, but is it linked to time at night? Like, does it happen between the hours of like 2 to 4? Cortisol has not only tapered off, but is beginning to pick back up because it's getting ready to wake you to start your day. One, this is the first question, and then two, is there a difference between male and female that get sleep paralysis? Does one gender, whatever, male or female, experience it more often than the other?
Yeah. Okay. The time question. That's a great question. We all know in antiquity, they talked about the witching hours, the 12 to 3, right? And it's interesting. So that's the third watch of the night in biblical language. Interestingly, it was the fourth watch of the night. It was the beginning of the fourth watch of the night. So we're probably talking about the tail end of the witching hours. It's probably 3, 4 a.m. This is when the disciples saw Jesus walking on the water towards the boat, and their immediate first assumption was that it was a ghost, probably because of the hour. It was the witching hour. Now, what's interesting about 12 to 3, a lot of people talk about this phenomenon happening at midnight or 3 a.m. I think it's really interesting that in prior centuries, people had first and second sleeps. They practiced biphasic sleep. For some reason, they wanted to be awake between 12 and 3. And the official narrative is like, hey, it just had to do with, the official narrative makes no sense because it talks about how the only reason that we don't do biphasic sleep anymore is because of the invention of the electric light. But, if they were up between 12 and 3 before electric light and they were having productive hours in candlelight, so there, it says online, when you do the research that people were cooking and visiting neighbors and playing games and whatever. But if you go into the deep, like liturgical research, the religious people were up between 12 and 3 praying and evaluating their dreams. And so there might have been more of an aspect of spiritual warfare there. Like, hey, if this is the witching hour, I'm going to be up. I'm going to be sober-minded. I'm going to be vigilant. I'm not going to get abducted out of my brain. I'm just speculating. I'm just theorizing because it's interesting to see kind of why that went out. But to answer your question, I don't think that it is limited anymore to the times of the day because people, during a nap, if you're in a deep sleep or you're jet lagged or you're stressed or you're in a deep sleep, deep meditative state, that can still happen. It's really more dependent on an altered state of consciousness because sleep paralysis can also happen. It's important to differentiate the sleep paralysis experience, which happens in an altered state of consciousness, usually the hypnopompic or the hypnagogic, where you're falling asleep or coming out of sleep, whereas the astral projection and the astral abductions are happening in the REM because they are different experiences. But by way of cortisol levels and everything going on in the brain and the brain waking up, the brain doesn't just wake up at certain times. It wakes up because the sun is getting through the eyelids and it's penetrating and that's sending messages to the brain that, hey, the sun is up. And so I'm going to, adjust the melatonin. But we now live in a culture where most of us stay up till 1, 2, 3 in the morning with a blue light shining right in our face. We've got a laptop or whatever. So our brains are so confused at this point. It's even though it's not as intense as the blue light of the sun, it is blue light. And so when you're up all night, this is why a lot of us get really hungry and we want a snack at midnight, and because the blue light is sending the message to the brain that it's morning, and so it's flipping all of the breakfast time switches on. So you're getting hungry because we're completely screwing up with our circadian rhythm and our brain functionality. So I don't think it is dependent upon those witching hours anymore. One of the most recent, very terrifying astral encounters I had, where I interfaced with several frightening dream characters, when I woke up, and granted, we don't know, to us it feels like instant, like we have a dream and we wake up, it feels instant, and maybe there were hours in between the end of the dream and when we woke up. But I woke up and it was like 11 in the afternoon because I had slept in, I'd been up all night, and so it wasn't like the 3 a.m., So I don't think it's as dependent upon time anymore as it used to be. Now, I do think that if you're dealing with human entities, if you're dealing with remote viewers or practitioners of witchcraft who are astral projecting, they're reliant upon those timelines because they're banking on when you're asleep and whatnot. I recently had somebody write to me, and I'd never heard this before. He said, "Do you ever get the popping in your ear like at 2, 3 in the morning?" And I'm like, no, I haven't. And to Headless Giant's point earlier, can something start happening as soon as you've heard about it for the first time? Like, what if I've never heard of this before? He told me that the powers that be, this is more of a militarized, targeted individual remote viewing scenario. He said there's something about the popping in the ear where they're testing to see if you're awake or asleep, because if you're not asleep yet, they're not going to activate their programming or whatever. And it was interesting because I'd never experienced it and I didn't know what he was talking about. And a couple days after getting that email, I started hearing the popping in my ears. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. Power of suggestion, right? But as far as the male and female, I don't know, because I get lots of emails from both, and they might be different experiences, and yet, we might have skewed statistics. It might statistically look like more women have this experience, or more women have the incubus experience, like the spirit spouse and the rape demons and stuff like that. But I think that has more to do with women are more willing to talk about their experiences. Whereas men are more like, I'm not going to look like a crazy person. And so because of where we're at now with the internet and with emails, I do get a lot of emails from males as well. And I will tell you that they are getting as many of those rape dreams as the women are. They just don't want to talk about it. You know what I mean? Because it's not like in the movies where it's this like great, better than human sex, Twilight, Edward Cullen, glitter boy, right? No, it's like these are shaming, violating rape scenarios that are being talked about. This isn't, honeymoon stuff that's being talked about. So I do believe that it happens not only as much to men and women, but you'd be surprised that it happens to very young children. And I get emails on a daily basis from people saying, I've had this since 3 or 4 years old. I remember having this in my crib, because you tend to remember traumatic memories. And so what I think a lot of people don't realize is this happens to very, 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 very young children. And unfortunately, it's hard to get a finger on that pulse, because if you have a toddler who's crying at night and all they're going to say is, I had a bad dream, you're not going to explore that further. And then we live in a culture where when we have kids that are trying as best as they can in their limited life experience to explain to mom and dad something like is going on. Mom, I'm scared. I don't want to go to bed. Can I sleep with the light on? Can I sleep with you? I saw red eyes. There's a monster under my bed. And we are just, again, programmed. Parents are programmed. It's just a dream. It's just a dream. Don't be scared, And so we write a lot of that off, probably because we don't want to scare the kid. We probably don't want to be scared either. But, if your kid is all of a sudden terrified of going to bed and is keeping themselves awake at all hours of the night, and it's affecting their sleep and it's affecting their, emotional and mental health, there's a point where maybe you should explore and medication and melatonin and a lot of this stuff that's designed to supposedly relax us really just puts us in an even more prime state of a vulnerability. So
Yeah, I could see that.
Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I of course I have a ton of questions. With sleep paralysis, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you're indicating that from your studies, your research, and your experiences, that it would be like an astral, like the tail end of an astral experience, correct?
Yeah, so this is where I have a hard time getting people to really hear me out on this. There's so much cognitive dissonance because we've bought into the narrative. And when you have an experience that you can't explain, and then you go online and you see it explained for you over and over and over again, you begin to reverse engineer that explanation onto your experience, and you can't see that anything else is happening. But what most people will tell you is, I woke up and I couldn't move and I saw this in my bedroom. But if they really explored the beginning of it, they would explain that they were having a dream and everything was great. And all of a sudden the dream goes dark. It goes bad. The vibrations start in the ear, or you understand in the dream, oh crap, it's happening again. And then the next thing you know, you're waking up in your bed. And what I'm trying to convince people of is, it looks seamless to you, like you're having a bad dream and you get scared and that fear wakes you up. And thank God I woke up before anything bad happened. But what's happening in many cases, and I'm talking about people that habitually have sleep paralysis over the course of their whole life, not just once or twice. But what's happening in many cases is you're being pulled out of your body and you're having some sort of an encounter with these dream characters. And just like the UFO abductees, when you get back into your body, you don't remember what happened. But you don't have the benefit of missing time like the UFO abductees have, because nobody wakes up 5, 6, 7, 8 hours later and questions where the time went. If there is even a smidgen or a fragment of a memory of a bad dream or a nightmare, we chalk it off to it just being a dream. So we're not going to evaluate it. We're not going to think about it. We're not going to ask any questions. What I think is happening is we are waking up in this kind of altered state of consciousness. We're not quite awake yet. We're coming out of this experience. We are in full fight or flight. Physiologically, we're in a high adrenaline mode because our body is trying to tell us in every way that it can, you were just in a very traumatic situation. And we don't have a memory of it, but our body is trying to tell us. Our heart is pounding. We are laying on our back in a defensive position. We often, all the saliva in our mouth is dried up. We can't move. We can't talk. What I think is happening is the shadow people that you see in the room, the red glowing eyes, the old hag, all of that stuff, I actually think they're trolling us. I think they're creating a diversion so that when we wake up and we have this full on adrenaline rush, but no memory of anything in the dreamscape that happened that would have scared us, we have to attach that physiological reaction to something tangible, or we'll start asking questions. So if you wake up in your room and you think there's a demon there or the Grim Reaper's hanging over you, all of the physiological things that you're experiencing, you will automatically ascribe to the fact that that thing in your room scared you. But I actually think that your heightened fear response was already activated in the REM and in the astral. And when you wake up, they're providing you with a visual to attach the emotions to, so that you don't ever reverse engineer it all the way back to the REM state and ask questions like, what happened? Is there missing time? What sort of interactions went on in the astral? What conversations did I have? What kind of invitations did I give any of the vampires, or what sort of covenants did I enter into? And I just think that there's a lot more to this than people waking up in their bedroom. And if you're lucid when you dream, or if this happens to you enough where you can, you have to be able to observe. And a lot of people can't observe when they're terrified because they're just focused on getting out of the situation. But if you observe, you will know you're not really in your bedroom yet, because there will be a glitch. There will be something wrong in the room. The window's on the wrong wall. You have a bedspread you don't really own. There's a bunch of pictures on the wall that aren't yours, or there's a bookshelf or a dresser there. There's always going to be one thing. If you're looking, this can't possibly really be my room. And I always find a glitch. And it's gotten to the point now where I'm so aware of the fact that there's going to be a glitch, and I look for the glitch. They don't even bother with the screen memories anymore, because I think these are screen memories of your room. They're replicating your room. You're not really there. And this is the thing that a lot of people, they don't want to believe me. I don't know why the cognitive dissonance is there. Maybe they don't want to deal with the fact that, hey, I just want to be safe in my room. Don't make this any more scary than it needs to be. But there's always a glitch. And now when I have these sleep paralysis experiences, they don't even bother with the screen memories anymore. I will literally see myself in a room with the observation window and the shadow person walking up to me. Like it's like the screen, they don't even waste their time with the screen memory anymore.
You said a few things before that I thought was really interesting. I guess maybe it was kind of like you said, maybe getting stuck in something, and like waking up in the middle of something going on. I for me, and I guess what I'm really getting at is I'm wondering if it's almost like a reverse effect. When I've mentioned before, you mentioned you think kind of like your soul separating from your body. That's exactly what I say I think magic is, but choosing to do that on purpose. As that does happen, from my experience, either sitting down or laying down, obviously my eyes closed, meditating. Before that happens, it will get to the point to where it's as if like only inside my head exists and nothing else. I feel nothing. That's gone to me. Like I just don't feel it. And I will start to feel like a rush, and then I start to come out like the back of my head, or it feels like a slip out. Like I was wondering if maybe the sleep paralysis, like you're talking about astral traveling or whatever. I'm wondering if like maybe you've come back in, but not enough to actually be the rest of your body, because now you're not going to be able to move anything because there's nothing there yet, really. You know what I'm saying? Like I couldn't move at that point probably, unless maybe I snapped myself out of it. But you know what I'm saying? Like I didn't feel my body to even move my arms.
Yes.
I was just in my head. So I was just wondering if it's like maybe kind of like coming back and getting like kind of waking up maybe a few seconds before you should have.
Yeah.
And becoming conscious.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is another thing I try to tell people who don't realize what you've already realized. I hear it every day. I hear Christians say the name of Jesus and it'll stop, but you have to say it out loud. And what's ridiculous about this is you can't. You don't have access to your mouth. You're not in your body. You're not there yet. You're not all the way there yet. And second of all, this whole thing, this comes from some tradition. It's not in the Bible. You learn it when you're in church as a little kid and you believe it and you never question it or ask where it's from or try to find the verse because it's nowhere. There's this tradition out there that Satan can't read your mind. And I'm thinking, well, he's an eternal, immortal being and we're stupid human beings. He doesn't even have to read our minds. Humans aren't that hard to figure out, but whether he can or can't, it doesn't matter. If you're calling on the name of Jesus, you're not talking to Satan anyway. You're calling on the name of Jesus and he can read your mind. So who cares? Like all of it's nonsense, all of these things that they're saying. So you don't have to say it out loud. And even if you did say it out loud, I've had times where in my in my dream where I think I'm awake in my bedroom, I'm saying something like get out, or I do not consent, or in the name of Jesus, whatever I'm saying. And I will go from that altered state where I think I'm in my room to a real waking state. And I will then be in and out halfway through my sentence. And when I actually hear myself in my brain, if you've ever had sleeping gas, like before a surgery, it's like that. You hear yourself talking, but you have no memory of answering the question. It's this weird altered state. I have been in the dream state where I think I'm awake in my room, and I'll say like, in the name of Jesus, get out. And I wake up halfway in the middle of it, and I hear myself audibly saying, you're not saying. So even if you're saying it out loud, you're not saying anything legible anyway. You know what I mean? So I think that people are trying so hard to move their body and say things, and it's like, you're not in your body yet. You can't access that stuff. And so it's all in the power of the mind at that point. I want to wake up. I don't consent to this. This is uncomfortable. You have to stop now. The same way with the Ouija board, when we're done now, I am in control of my noetic sovereignty. Goodbye. We're done. I choose, and I mean, I've never done a Ouija board, but I'm just telling you that this is the law of interacting with entities. You say goodbye, and they're done. They have to go away. It's done. And it's the same thing with these sleep paralysis situations. As soon as you say we're done, you don't have to say it out loud. You don't have to scream it. You don't have to yell it. It's really not that complicated. As soon as you, in your noetic sovereignty, say we're done, these things go away immediately. And I don't want to take away any sort of, I'm not saying, okay, there's no power in the name of Jesus. But what I do tell the Christians who come to me, yes, if you say in the name of Jesus, get out, but guess what? There's tons of people that just say get out, and it works the same. And I'm not diminishing the power of the name, but what I'm telling you is what they have to observe is your free will. When you tell them, get out, I'm done, goodbye, go away, you're not welcome here, you are revoking that vampiric invitation. They don't have their invitation. They have to have your permission. And so, yeah, saying in the name of Jesus, get out works, but get the hell out of here works too. You know what I mean? I've heard it all.
Vicky, I've witnessed, like we were talking about before hitting the record button, I've witnessed a couple of people go through sleep paralysis and didn't know each other. And it's exactly as you said, they're almost like moaning, mumbling, like they're wanting to speak, but it's almost as their lips have super glue.
Yeah.
And it will not open. And I would hesitate to touch her or to touch, her arm or whatever, because how they in Hispanic folklore, if somebody's sleepwalking, they tell you not to wake them because of what. And so I would hesitate or whatever, but the moment I would touch her arm, it felt like everything under her skin was just electric, just on fire, like just alive, like just kind of on edge. But the moment I would touch her, she would immediately wake up, and she would literally say, "Thank you for touching my arm," because I couldn't wake up on my own. And that was my roommate one time. And then this was another friend of mine. We were spending a night at her house. She said the same thing. She's like, "Thank you for waking me up. I couldn't wake up."
Yeah.
And so it was weird because the sensation on their arm was the same. And these are two totally different places, different times in my life, that it was identical.
Wow.
So it's funny how you said, like, when you finally say something, it's this moan or like this opening of the mouth, not coherent, because it looking at her, it was almost as if her lips were super glued shut.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I walked in on my college roommate one time, and she was taking a nap, like in between classes, or she had a downtime or whatever. And I'd had sleep paralysis my whole life, and I had never heard the phrase sleep paralysis yet. This was in the 90s, so I don't think it was really a thing yet. And people didn't talk about it, and I didn't know anyone suffered with it. And I saw my roommate asleep on her bed, and it freaked me out, because I'm like, she's having sleep paralysis, except I didn't call it that because I didn't have a word for it at that point. And I couldn't believe it. It was this epiphany moment for me. And so because I had been through it so many times, I went over and I was like, and same thing. She's like, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I said, what just happened to you? And she explained it to me. I'm like, that's happened to me my whole life. I couldn't believe it. Like, it was amazing. But I don't remember feeling anything. But I was sort of like, I wasn't real gentle with her either. I was like, wake up. But anytime you run into someone who's having sleep paralysis, believe me, they want to be woke up. They're trying everything in their power to be woken up. And one thing that I got from Robert Monroe, I think it's in his third volume of his trilogy, The Far Journeys. He talks about, this was another like eye-opening moment for me. And it's also another way that you can sort of evaluate once you've woke up, was I in the astral realm or was that just a dream? Is he said, when you have a dream that you're searching for your car, you're in a parking lot and you're searching all over for your car and you can't find your car. And it just gave me the chills the first time I read that, because I've had that as a reoccurring dream so many times. And he said that your car is like a metaphor for your body, because your car is this vehicle that carries you around everywhere you want to go, and so is your body. So when you're out of your body, it's looking for its vehicle, right? It made so much sense. And now that's helped give me clarity, because sometimes when you wake up, you're not 100% sure if it was astral or not. And so there's indicators. And so whenever I've had that, where I'm in a parking ramp or a parking lot, like I'll have memory of going into a building or a mall or a church or something, and then I'll come out into the parking lot and then I'll go, oh, I can never find the car. And you will sit there. And again, this is, we're talking about the time dilation again. You will feel like you're in that parking lot for hours looking for that car before you wake up. But, you know, if you're in an REM cycle, it was probably only 10 to 20 minutes.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up earlier the idea of induced comas, because it's like 1 out of 3 people who are in an induced coma aren't really unconscious the whole time. They're just in kind of a prison of their own mind for weeks at a time.
Oh.
Yes, I know. Yeah, I read a book years ago, and it was a guy. He was he wasn't a missionary, but he had this idea. And unfortunately, I lent the book to somebody and I never got it back, and I'll never be able to remember anymore who wrote it or whatever, because I think I was in college when I read it. But he would go to hospitals and he would go into the rooms where people were in comas, and he would preach the gospel to them and read the Bible and sing worship songs and comfort them and talk to them and da-da-da-da-da-da. And, you know, a lot of these people, they didn't ever come out of the coma, or he never saw them again or whatever, but he had a certain percentage of them that came back and said, I heard every word you said.
Right. And there's really no medical literature that actually supports the idea that medical comas are so necessary. And they use it all the time. And it's a travesty to think that we're putting people into that kind of a prison.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like an absolute, some of the testimonies I've heard of people that have been in comas, and they're not saying anything. Their point isn't to say anything paranormal or mystical or religious or whatever, but they just say that you still go to sleep and wake up and you have no idea how to differentiate what's the reality and what's the dream. And then when they're having like the nightmares, and oh my gosh, the way that they describe it, it sounds so much like this Inception, like the dream within the dream kind of astral stuff that you get, you know. And I don't know enough about a medical coma, but if you're introducing any sort of medication into that, or anything that's going to put you in an altered state of consciousness, you're just opening a door and putting a welcome mat out to whoever is like, hey, look at this idiot. He's not in control. We're going to, you know, have a field day with this guy. Like, you're so vulnerable when you're in those states of altered consciousness.
Did anybody else have anything else that they wanted to ask? No, was there anything else, Vicky, that you wanted to get into?
You know, I'm just like really just enjoying the conversation, because it's just taken so many twists and turns. away from the ordinary conversations. And
Yeah.
I just love this kind of stuff. And so many of the things that you brought up are stuff that I've read up on and been fascinated on and don't usually come up in the conversation. And especially getting to kind of talk about more of the 21st century version of this and the tech aspects of it and where it's headed. And so, no, I mean, this has just been a really fun change of pace.
Yeah. It's been a lot different than I thought.
To Vicky's point, tech has taken on this whole angle of exploring sleep.
Yes.
And it's not readily talked about or advertised, but if you peek into the literature of tech and sleep, REM, whatever, it's there. I mean, they're really, really mining as much as they can. It's almost like the next frontier, so to speak. Not so much consciousness, obviously that's another frontier, but sleep in and of itself, tech has really started to dive deep into it.
Yeah, I like that. The next frontier, that's so appropriate. Yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
It's a third of our lives that we're spending, unconscious.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah.
Very good point.
And when you think about it, if you want to think about that logically, you can say, well, sleep is a gift and it's rest and it's, you can talk like poetically about it. But if you want to go down the realms of, let's pretend that the creator is actually not a dope. If we're going to spend a third of our life asleep, there must be some sort of meaning and purpose and achievement in it. It's not just a waste of time. And so I tend to think that the creator is not a dope and that those sleeping hours aren't to be wasted. Yes, we should get real sleep and we should, figure out how to take care of our brains and our bodies. But we just can't ignore the fact that this whole concept of dreams is very mysterious. We haven't really come too far into figuring it out. And when you look
kind of have, I think, the most bullshit answers, honestly, for it. I hate to say
Yeah. I mean, they can't tell you why we dream. We go to bed at night and we have all of these like movies playing. Our brain turns into a movie theater. Like, this makes no sense. And they don't have a lot of medical or scientific answers for us. They're all hypotheses and they're all guesses. And there's got to be some meaning to it. And I don't think it's something that should be trifled with. I think that it is an area of exploration that we need to continue trying to figure out. What am I supposed to get out of it? If we're going to be in our waking hours, if we're going to be asking, what's the meaning of life? Why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? We don't cut out a third of our life as meaningless.
Right. So in ancient Greece, they had these things called the Asclepion. And
yes.
The Asclepion is where you would go to sleep in the temple. And this is where you get the term sleeping in. And these temple experiences would be to diagnose illnesses by being visited in your dreams by either Asclepius or one of his daughters, Hygeia, or the other one.
And Panacea?
Panacea. And Panacea we know is the all medicine, right?
Yes.
And so having these experiences led to a whole different form of hospital, basically, that have really good track record in curing illnesses.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I go into probably needless detail, but I go into exorbitant detail about the Asclepions in my book. I think chapter 3, because so Asclepius, the serpent god of healing, and Asclepius's rod is the pole with the serpent that goes up it, that to this day is our symbol. And not to be confused, a lot of people confuse the rod of Asclepius with the other one,
says that all the
help
time
me out
too.
here.
Yeah.
It's the Caduceus.
Caduceus. Yes,
it was
thank
the
you.
U.S. Army that actually made that confusion. They're the ones that. So they put that on the medical corps, the Caduceus, and then all these other hospitals started to use that as well. But it's like, guys, you messed it up. That's the symbol for profit. So they put the symbol for profit on the front of these hospitals, and Look what
That's
happened
some
to our
shit.
medical system.
No, right? Yeah, it's super fascinating. And I also get every time I talk about the Asclepius and the rod of Asclepius, I do get Christians writing to school me that no, that's a Christian symbol. It's the serpent on the pole that people looked at in the Old Testament and got healed. And I say, no, the Bible flat out calls that serpent on the pole the Nehushtan. It's right in the Bible. It's not the same thing. Asclepius, Hygeia, Panacea, they are all mentioned in the original Greek Hippocratic Oath. You are aligning with Apollos and his children, and those were your mentors. It's all right there. It's a medical. It goes back to the Asclepians, the serpent god of healing. And if you were lucky enough to make it into an Asclepion, because there's certain people that weren't allowed in. Pregnant women and the elderly were not allowed in because they didn't want any death in the Asclepion. It wasn't good for advertising. And once you got into the Asclepion, you went through a series of, you were basically entertained until you were in a nice, different brain state. And then you were sedated, and then you were brought into the catacombs, and you would wander around in the dark, kind of with the sedation. And then you would sleep in these underground rooms, and snakes would crawl around, and it was good luck if the snake crawled over you. But they would astral project, and they would dream a cure. And these entities up in the astral, they're not stupid. They gave you an actual cure. And when you woke up, you would tell the physician / high priest, this is the cure, put a leech on my finger or whatever it was. And if you got cured, you would pay them in gold, silver, or precious metal, fashioned into the shape of the body part that got healed. And we see references of this even in scripture when the Philistines got a hold of the Ark of the Covenant, and things weren't going so well for them, and they're like, we got to get rid of this box, we got to get rid of this thing. And they had tumors that they got from rats, and when they got rid of the Ark of the Covenant, the plague went away. And their offering to the Hebrew people was to fashion out of gold rats and tumors that they put in. And that was because in their culture, that's how you paid someone when you got healed of a disease, which is what happened to them when they got rid of the Ark. What do you got there, Headless Giant?
All right, so this is a painting by Gustav Klimt called Medicine.
Oh, wow.
Around here, we see the goddess Hygeia.
Okay.
Holding out the cup of Letha, which causes you to forget your past lives as you're being reincarnated. And so, as you can see, the snake is wrapped around her arm there, the golden snake. And then behind her is this river of souls, which represents the living, right? And as you can see in the detail, they're all asleep. All of these characters behind her. So they're all in various states of living, but they're all sleeping while they're doing it. And over there is the goddess of life, bringing, life into the world, into this realm of river of souls. And you can see there's 2 points connecting her to the rest of the painting with the rest of it there. And what he's also saying in the background is that you see this blood, right? And on the blood, you see all the golden coins. And so he's basically saying that reincarnation is of the blood. It's coming through these bloodlines, and that we're sort of all in this kind of fugue state while awake, because we're not aware of any of these factors that are going on basically behind the scenes. And actually, this painting made a lot of doctors upset, because in saying medicine and then showing you this picture of death and the afterlife, he's saying everybody's going to die anyway, so you're not actually, really doing anything other than putting off the inevitable. So doctors didn't like it. This painting was burned by the Nazis, so it doesn't really exist anymore. They just have a composite of it. But basically, as they were retreating from a castle, they decided to light it on fire, and so that was the end for that painting. So it's got a very interesting history.
Wow. That's amazing. That whole study of the 1st and 2nd century with the Asclepions and the whole dreaming a cure, extremely fascinating. If you are doing a seriously intellectual deep dive into trying to understand your sleep paralysis, if you're not running across Asclepion in your research, you're going to miss out on a really big piece of understanding.
Right.
Yeah, I think
and what's interesting too. Oh, go ahead, Nick.
I was gonna say, I think you actually at one point on the show, I think you actually read out that whole thing and actually pointed out all those names in there that I had no idea about either.
Yeah, it's just an amazing painting, and I don't think enough people understand the symbolism in it. So it's I think it's Gustav Klimt's masterwork, to be honest. And he's had a lot of really great paintings too.
What's the name of the painting again?
Medicine.
All right.
I think if you guys don't mind, well, for one, Vicky, I mean, there's actually tons of things I didn't say and I would like to bring up and get into even now, even the whole healing thing and being out of your body, stuff with that I'd like to get into, but it'll be a whole other show. Love to maybe really get you on again in the future to talk about a few other different avenues with this stuff. But I think we'll wrap it up now. I really, this was an amazing episode. I really just thoroughly enjoyed talking about this and listening to your stuff.
Me too.
Yeah, this
Thank
is
you
a
guys
really
so
cool
much for having
conversation.
me on.
No, hell yeah. Well, that's why I had said to you earlier. So why the hell haven't I had you on the show yet? When I messaged
I don't know.
so I was like, what the fuck? I was like, totally, you fit it, totally. So again, thank you so much, Vicky. Please let everybody else, listening, please let everybody know where they can find you. And find your work.
Absolutely. You can find me on VickyJoyAnderson.com, on YouTube at Vicky Joy Anderson, all caps. I'm at Vicky Joy Author on most social media. And if you'd like to meet me in person, you can come to Mansfield, Ohio, the weekend of March 27 through 29. I will be speaking at the Strange Land Conference on Conjugal Nightmares and the Nuptials of Nosferatu.
Oh, that is awesome. If you can, seriously, Vicky, after the show, if you can, send me like a link to that or whatever. I want to check out where this place is.
I will.
Yeah, I want to see how far away it is from me and JJ. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. Thank you again. Like for real, you're leaving me with things to think about. So this is
awesome.
This is
you
awesome
guys, you guys are leaving me with stuff to talk about too.
Good. Thanks. And Headless, please let everybody know where they can find all your amazing stuff as well.
Well, you can find me on YouTube and X. I go by Headless Giant. If you have experiences like the ones we've been talking about, send them to me, headlessgiantpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you.
Yes, please send them over. And sorry, it was my fault. I screwed that one up this week with the show. But yeah, no, I really do. Actually, I'll be honest with you. I really do I look forward to doing it with you. It is fun, actually. So yeah, send out those emails. If you got any experiences, you want to, I guess, somehow try to stay anonymous. If your email doesn't have your name in there, I mean, just don't leave your name. Whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate everything. The questions you asked, the stuff you brought to the table, the reason why you're here. Thank you very much. Is there anything you want to plug or anything you want to?
Vicky, thank you so much for everything that you spoke about today. Like Nick had said, it opened up so many other portals of thought and potential exploration of topics that had not even crossed my path. So I'm enlightened. I'm very overjoyed by having this opportunity to speak to you. And I do hope that Nick has you on for other topics, because I'm sure we're going to come up with other things. So Thank you again. The only thing I'd like to plug is just the Occult Research Institute.org, our website, to where we have, just Occult Research Institute.org. Yeah. And then just a lot of contributors that have allowed us to kind of share the work that they've provided, written work rather. So occultresearchinstitute.org. Check us out there.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I guess one thing I want to say just before we wrap it up, from doing this podcast for the last few years, and even from this show right here, this is one of them. Sometimes I do get left with the thought that like maybe the experiences that I've had with magic, other people have had them too, but just in different ways. You know what I'm saying? It just wasn't the avenue that I took. So we're having a different experience, maybe because we have a different way to reference back to it. But maybe it's the same thing a little bit. So I guess what I'm getting at is that maybe some people have had the same experience and they're really not that different. It's just they don't know how to look at it. I don't know. You kind of left me with thinking other people, have had the same experience as me, just saw it in a different way, possibly. All right. Thank you so much again. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Headless. And that is the end of another Occult Rejects. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.